Frank Tolman, who happens to not be here this morning. He's away visiting his father with his family. Him and I went into Bangor for a service on a Thursday night. After that service, well, we had to get something to eat, so we went to KFC, and we went into KFC. Steve. Greg's father was in there, and we all ordered our stuff. And I don't know, Greg's mom, Beverly, were you sitting out in the vehicle that night?
No.
Because he told me that sometimes he gets in trouble with you, making him wait and stuff, because he talks and stuff. Well, he talked that night as well, and no offense to our brother, I enjoyed our discussion. In our discussion, he shared with me that Greg was in the hospital, and if I could get over to visit him, maybe that'd be good. Well, we had a nice talk that night, and I made a point of getting over there, and I think I made it over a couple of times. I was supposed to try to hook up with him a third time. Anyways, I really enjoyed my visit with him when I went and saw Greg. You know, I don't know if any of you are familiar with this happening to you. You look to go to help somebody, or you look to go to be a source of encouragement to somebody, or to minister to somebody, and before you know it, it's kind of turned right around on you. And they're encouraging you, and they're ministering to you. And I got to say that when I went in to visit Greg, I intended to go in to minister, to be there. And before I left, and I think I may have shared this with him, I was the one that, I said, I don't know who's more blessed from this time together, Greg, me or you, because, man, what you shared with me really has blessed me. I'm encouraged from just being with you and listening to your story. And you know, I gave him an invitation to come and speak this Father's Day because of some of the different things he shared with me pertaining to him, with his relationship with his earthly father, and just his whole story. And I'll tell you, as I've told him, I am delighted to have Greg Frost here this morning to share his testimony. Greg, would you come? He's also going to sing, and we'll just let the Lord. What's that?
Don't build it up.
No, don't build it up too much. That's all right. Would you help to welcome Greg? Amen. This morning. Amen.
He's just the pastor.
What did she say? She said something.
No, she's... It's track 4, I think. A lot of people call this a special. I know a lot of places I've been. I don't know how special this is going to be. But his parents, not just fathers, I think fathers play a big role because we're the head of the house, and that's our job. Our kids are to look to us for everything. But as fathers, I think that this song says it best. It's an old song that's from the early 90s, and I've heard it all my life. And I actually had this, I bought this a long time ago, and I was like, God, I just want an opportunity to sing this somewhere. Now, typically my voice isn't bad, but I'm just getting over a cold, so bear with me. Go ahead, guys. Well, since we've got a minute for the sound, I'll say this. I want to thank my dad. Because given the situation I'm in, it's not always easy. And you know what? As a whole family, it's not easy. But the one thing I've always been able to count on from my dad is to push me and to be positive, because at the end of the day, all this is going to be okay and all this isn't going to matter. Because when everything's said and done, whether it's that I breathe my last or we get carried away in rapture, none of this is gonna matter. The situation I'm in isn't gonna matter. So I just wanna thank Dad for being there every time, through every tear, every time I did something and didn't ask for permission and ended up having to say I'm sorry, and still being there. He's loved me no matter what. And as parents, a lot of people say, well, that's what parents do. That's what you're supposed to do. And I've found through the number of people that I've talked to, that's not the way all parents feel. It's not the way all dads feel. Now we're running in an age where dads, they do the deed and they get out because they don't want to stand up and take responsibility. The one thing my dad always taught me was that no matter what you do, whether it's right, whether it's wrong, you own up to it and you take responsibility. I want to thank Dad because you know what? Pastor said it right. The apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. And I've got my little girl, and I'm doing my best, my absolute best, to raise her like my dad raised me. Why? People nowadays tell me I'm very hard on her. Me? I just say I'm trying to raise her right. But if I didn't have the dad I had, and he didn't have the dad he had, then I wouldn't be where I'm at, and I wouldn't be raising my daughter the way I'm raising her. So for that, I'm thank you, and I want to thank you, Dad. Go ahead, guys. Calls me dad and I call her love. With her faded old pillow, her bare name Pooh, she snuggles up close and says, I wanna be like you. Tuck her in bed and I kiss her goodnight, tripping over the toys as I turn out the light. And I whisper a prayer someday she'll see she's got a father in God, 'cause she's seen Jesus in me. 'Cause I wanna be just like you. 'Cause she wants to be just like me. I wanna be a holy example for her innocent eyes to see. Help me be a living Bible, my little girl to read. I wanna be just like you, 'cause she wants to be like me. Gotta admit I've got so far to go, making so many mistakes, and I'm sure that you know. Sometimes it seems no matter how hard I try, all the pressures in life, I just can't get it all right. But I'm trying to learn from the best, being patient and kind, full of your tenderness. And I know that one day she'll see Jesus she finds will be the Jesus in me. Lord, I want to be just like you, 'cause she wants to be just like me. Let me be a holy example for her innocent eyes to see. Help me be a living Bible, Lord, for my little girl to read. I want to be just like you, 'cause she wants to be like me. Right now from where she stands, I may seem mighty tall, but it's only 'cause I'm learning from the best father of them all. I wanna be just like you, 'cause she wants to be just like me. I wanna be a holy example for her innocent eyes to see. Help me be a leader Bible, Lord, that my little girl can read. I wanna be just like you, 'cause she wants to be like me. I wanna be just like you, 'cause she wants to be like me. I think as a godly father, I think that's everybody's prayer. I hope it's everybody's prayer and what they strive for. You're gonna want to fade that out because that goes for a really long time. My name's Greg Frost. How are you? I'm so glad to be here. This is what I do. Like I said, you want me to use the other mic? Okay. Like I said, I haven't always been this way. About 10 years ago, 11 years it'll be in November. And November 3rd of 2004 was the day that changed my life, changed our lives in general. Me, my mother, my sister. I was in the process of getting engaged. My fiance was 6 months pregnant, and with Maya, who's now 10. I want to tell all the parents, if you're new parents, if you're not parents yet, be careful when you have kids because the time goes so fast. It literally seems like I fell asleep, and when I woke up, she's 10 years old. It's had a big impact on all of us. November 3rd, 2004 is a day that I'm reminded of daily. Maya had a funeral. I had just gotten hired at a job. See, I do sales. I do retail and sales because I like people. And a lot of people laugh when I say that, but I genuinely like people. So I've always done retail and I've always done sales, and my big dream job ever since I've been relatively young was to sell cars. And so finally, after working since I was 16 on every kind of retail job, I was selling boats, selling retail, whatever, I got the opportunity to go and work for a car dealership. So immediately I was like, yeah, sign me up. It was day 10, and I was still doing training and whatnot, and my aunt had passed away, and she was my great aunt, and so my boss gave me and my uncle, who also worked at the dealership, the day off. He said, just take the day. It was, you guys be with the family, have family time, and, go ahead. Okay, great, thanks. We left work, we went to the funeral, and came home. I got changed at my house. I went to the house that me and my fiance were in the process of buying. Went to say goodbye, and I had the whole day that I had off. I mean, my boss was like, yeah, go ahead, take the whole day. It's kind of a family day. Do what you got to do. Don't worry about it. Come back in tomorrow. Sure. But then I got thinking about it, and that didn't settle well with me because it's a new job. And I'm not the type to take a new job that I've wanted forever, and just be like, oh, well, he gave me the day off, I'm gonna take the day off. So I decided, I was already in a suit anyway for the funeral, I might as well go back to work and build some professional character, stand up to the boss a little bit. I gave him the whole day off, but he came in to do his training. So on my way to work, I stopped at the house me and my fiance were in the process of buying, and we kind of chit-chat a little bit, talked about the funeral and whatnot, and I almost stayed home. Like, I had the idea to stay home and just hang out with her, convince her to call into work, and we just hang out. But it caught me. Nope. I got professional character I need to uphold. I need to go. So I left. It being the house that I grew up in, that I was buying, actually. So I jumped in my truck. I had a beautiful truck. And a weird thing about the house was there was a window right by the kitchen, like dining room kitchen area, that if somebody looked out at, they could see anybody getting in their vehicles. It was the weirdest thing in the world. I got in my truck, and I've been in one car accident before this one. When I was 16, I was hit by a drunk driver, and it really kind of messed me up. It didn't put me in the wheelchair, but it broke my leg, broke my arm, and almost killed me. So my mom, after that, at that point, was very adamant that I had my seatbelt on. And sometimes if she would look as I left and I didn't have a seatbelt on, I could count on a call or to be let know in some way, shape, or form that I need to put my seatbelt on. And literally the day I got in the truck and I sat back, and it was literally like I saw my mother in that window watching me. So I grunted, grabbed my seatbelt, clicked it on, pulled her in reverse, took off to work. I was working in Newport Ford, and the house was in Corinth, so 15, 20 minutes away. I left, said I love you, jumped in the truck and gone. Next thing I know, I was waking up and taking an account of everything around me, I was in a hospital. Again, not my first accident, so that's not the first time that something like this has happened. You know, waking up and a little confused of where you are, but you realize where you are is in a hospital. I looked, and my family was around me. I had my mom, my dad, my fiance, and I was like, hey. And, they're emotional because I didn't really understand why they're so emotional. I've been in the hospital before. What I didn't realize is everything they'd been through. See, my truck went off the road in Corinna. Don't know how, and don't know why. And according to the guy that was behind me, he said, literally, you were going, I was right behind you. He goes, you were going, and it's literally like you just slid sideways off into the ditch. It was November. It was not icy. It was 3-something in the afternoon. Not a problem. Sun was shining. It was a good day. And I just slid off into the ditch. But when I hit the ditch, my back tire caught the ditch, and it put me into a roll. My truck came to rest against a tree line, and when it came to rest, it burst into flames. And I was trapped. I couldn't go anywhere, couldn't move. All of these things everything I'm telling you right now, I don't remember. This is what I've been told by the guy that was directly behind me and a friend of mine that was on the fire and rescue truck. But it basically burst into flames. And I believe in divine appointments. I believe there are people, you are put in places at certain specific times in people's lives where you're going to make an impact or you're going to make a difference, one or the other. And it just so happened that this gentleman happened to have a divine appointment with me that day because his grandfather lived right across the street from my accident. He looked at my truck and there was fire shooting out of the window, and he ran across the street to his grandfather's house and grabbed the kitchen fire extinguisher. Which was great, because it was going to be some help. But it wasn't great help, because I guess what had happened was the flames, because it was not just, it just wasn't like my material on my truck was on fire. I had chemicals from the engine compartment, the oil, the antifreeze, all these things that were also on fire, which tends to make, I guess, an automobile fire even hotter. He couldn't get closer than 20 feet because the fire was so hot coming out of the window. And he couldn't see me. All he could see was the outline of my face. And he was trying to do his best because luckily he was at the top of the hill in Corinna and the fire station was just at the bottom. And long story short, fire and rescue came, Newport Fire and Rescue came. They cut off the top of my truck and extracted me. Reason why I couldn't get myself out was I had my seatbelt on, and this is no way my mother's fault. I would encourage everybody to wear your seatbelt. But the seatbelt snapped my back. And according to the doctors is my back didn't really break. Like, you know how you have a broken arm, you have a straight line where it's fractured. Mine kind of exploded. So I have a lot of shards of bone and pieces pressing against my back, sticking into my spinal column, which is what gives me the inability to walk. And so that's the baseline. They life flighted me from Corinna to Bangor, and then they life flight where basically Dr. Grossman saved my legs. They were charred. I have burns from my knees to my feet on both legs because I was torched. No way around it. And ultimately, they had to do grafts in Boston. So I've been all grafted. It removed a lot of muscle. I didn't have a whole lot of muscle tissue left. So I flew to Bangor. Dr. Grossman scored my legs. Basically, he ran a scalpel down my legs to cut them open and let all this pressure out of my legs, because had he not, the pressure would have been so great from the swelling from the burns that it would have crushed my lower legs. So luckily, they did that. They sent me to Boston. I spent 5 weeks in a medically induced coma in Boston. And that's why I didn't understand my parents were so emotional, because my list of injuries included I punctured one lung, I collapsed the other. I had obviously spinal cord injury, I broke my back. I had my grafts, my burns. I burned those 2 legs. This hand was all burned and grafted. I split my head open too, which anytime you hear anybody want to dispute that God doesn't do miracles and miracles don't happen anymore, I disagree. I had a traumatic brain injury, and what happened is evidently my head had hit so hard, either the windshield or could have been the steering wheel, but these 2 frontal lobes had pretty much popped and were bleeding, and they were causing what's called a shearing effect from the front of my head to about midway back. And basically it was just that they were bleeding. It was bleeding and causing pressure. And your skull doesn't allow your head, your brain to swell or any extra fluid to go in there because it's pretty full already. So it caused me big issues, as well as I had about the number, I think it's about, I had like 25, 27 pinhole spots on the rest of my brain that had ruptured and were bleeding. One thing that they always say about the brain is that it doesn't fix itself. It doesn't heal itself. If you have a brain bleed, chances are you're gonna die with it. You're either gonna always have it, and you're probably gonna die with it, because the brain does not fix itself. So I went to Mass General. They flew me there, and while I was in Mass General, they did a lot of tests. And they were going to do a test, because ultimately they said he's brain dead. There's no way you can, that he was going to have a shearing effect and all these other little spots on my head and be okay. They told my parents and my fiance for 4 weeks straight, you better say your goodbyes, because there's no way he's going to survive this. Wait, let's say if he does survive this, he's going to be a vegetable. Like, you're going to have to do everything for him. They tried to convince them that if I came home, they'd have to put me in a facility where they were going to have to do everything, so people can trained people can take care of him. You can go in and visit if you want, but really, the lights are going to be on and there's going to be cobwebs in the windows. There will definitely be nobody home. My parents didn't believe that. My parents had different signs along the way that things were going to be okay. Understand, I was born and raised in church. And when I say born and raised in church, if I wasn't dying when I was a kid, I was in church. Sunday mornings, even if I didn't feel, Mom, I don't feel good. Well, get dressed, you're going to church. But I don't feel good. You're going to church. That was just the way it was. And unless I was literally throwing up walking out the door. I was at church. And I didn't like it, especially when I hit 14. But at the same time, looking back on it now, if I didn't have parents that cared enough to keep me where I belonged every Sunday morning for my entire life, I can't imagine where I'd be today. Would I be in front of you? Nope. After all of this, no way. So my parents were very much, they knew there was going to be something more. But when you walk into a hospital that's full of people that aren't faith-based and that are all about science, science says his brain ain't going to fix. He's going to have this, and he's always going to have this. So they went and they did CAT scans, brain scans, and all this. I had the ruptured lobes. I had the 27 spots. The brain doesn't heal itself. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Frost, you better get ready because he's not going to make it. You should prepare yourself. And they refused to believe it. My dad is great because my parents are kind of polar opposites. My dad is an optimist. There's no way around it. For the most part, he's an optimist. My mom, it's a little dicey. But my dad wouldn't give up. Why? Because I'm his son. But me and my dad, it's more than father-son relationship. Me and my dad are friends. I didn't like him when I was 14. Wasn't a fan of him when I was 16. But at 31, my dad's my friend. And he told the nurse, they were getting ready to do a brain test, and they were going to inject me with chemical. And what it did is it would illuminate the parts of my brain that might work, or that did work. But they were pretty sure that my brain was kind of like Jell-O. And my dad went to my nurse and said, is there any way you can keep them from doing this test? Like, is there anything you can do to test or check or see? And Nurse Katie was like, I really can't. I said, if the doctors don't give me orders, I don't just lose my job. She goes, I'll never be able to nurse anywhere again. She goes, I really wish I could do more. My dad says, well, listen, he was born and raised in church. We're church people. And God has more for him than this. The Bible says, train up a child in the way he should go, and he will not depart from it when he's old. It's true. I had to go to church every day of my life, all through my teenage years. And through my teenage years, I was not a fan. But I knew I had to go because I didn't have any other options or any other ride. So through all that, I went to private school too, where every week we had to learn a different memory verse off the paces and all of this. Hated that too. But because my parents raised me the way I should go, when they found me on fire, very literally on fire in Corinna, I wasn't screaming. I wasn't crying. I was quoting scripture and praying in the Spirit. Why? Because when trauma hits your life in any way, in any area whatsoever, what you're made of is what's going to come out. And that was the first thing that I really understood when I really got thinking about this and putting my testimony together to do at places. When you're put into a test and trial and trauma hits your life and you're stuck in the eye of this storm and there is no relief in sight, what you're really made of is what's going to show up. All I knew through my entire life was church, God, praying and speaking in tongues. That's what it was. And that's what they found me doing. I only know this. I had a friend on the Newport Fire Department that was supposed to be cutting the top off my truck. He pulled up and he looked at his chief and he says, I can't do this. And his chief, well, why not? This is your job. This is what you got to do. He says, I can't. And the chief says, why not? And the guy looks and he goes, I know the guy in the truck. He goes, I just can't do it. But that's what he told me after. He says, when we showed up in the truck to cut the top of your truck off and get you out, you were praying, quoting scriptures and speaking in tongues. It was the other guys were completely freaked out because they thought I was talking Chinese and that you were going into shock. Which, hey, whichever way the Lord wants to reach them, I could call that a seed. But yeah, they were freaked right out. They didn't know what to do. I was going into shock and they needed to do something. But I really want to emphasize that, not just that my parents took me to church, but the fact that what you're made of is going to come out when you're tested and when you're tried. When you don't see an end in sight and when you don't see anything getting any better, hang tight. Quicken yourself in the Word, in what God has for you, because every trial and every situation you go through is just another way for Him to work. So he went through this with my nurse, and there's nothing I can do, and he was born and raised in church. God has more than to put him, than to allow this accident to happen and then just to leave. That's not the God my dad knows. That's not the God I know. And it just turned out to be, I'm sorry, Steve, I just can't. All right. And through all this, up to this point, this is like 4 weeks or so, maybe the start of 5, my mom had seen I think she was a cleaning lady, or somebody that took care of the floor, like cleaned and whatnot. And she looked at my mom, and she says, "Your son's gonna be okay." And I'm sure my mom had this puzzled look after being told by numerous doctors at Mass General Hospital that I weren't going to be okay. She goes, "I've seen an angel at his bed at night when I've been cleaning. That's nothing on me. I have nothing to do with angels. It's all about him." So after my dad pleaded with my nurse and that didn't work, they went home, or they went to the hotel. My fiance, my mom, my dad, and then evidently my dad just simply stating, "You know what? We born him and raised him in church, and guess what? God's not going to leave him like this." And my nurse said she couldn't do anything, which legally shouldn't. If you want a job, you shouldn't. But it was just enough, evidently, to get her thinking. Sometime in the middle of that evening, that night, she went into my room. I was obviously out. I had tubes and wires. I had a feeding tube. I had a trach, so I had something breathing for me, or helping me breathe. And I was a mess. I wrapped head to toe because I'd had grafts. I was in a great big burn bubble. She walked in, and she backed me down off my methadone and my meds. She slipped her hand into my left hand, and this is nothing that I remember. There's nothing that I remember. This is what I've been told from my dad, and what I remember my nurse talking about when I was there. She slipped her hand in my left hand. She says, "Greg, my name's Katie. I'm a nurse at Mass General Hospital, and you've been in a pretty bad accident. But if you can hear me, and you understand what I've said, then squeeze my hand with your left hand." I squeezed her hand. Now, to go before this, to kind of elaborate on, why my dad asked and was very adamant. I'm sure he was very adamant because, that me and my dad's relationship is such. We're hunting buddies. We're fishing buddies. We do everything together. There's very little that we didn't do together. If it was a trip to the dump and I wasn't busy or I wasn't doing anything and I was home, we'd go to the dump. Just simple things like that. Which is why he was so adamant. And so my nurse was in there, squeezed her hand with my left hand. She came around to my other side, and this is my more damaged side. My hand really couldn't bend a whole lot, but she slid her hand near mine. She goes, Greg, I know you can't squeeze my hand, but she goes, Greg, this is Katie. If you can hear me and you remember what I said, I need you to try and squeeze my hand with your right hand. I couldn't squeeze her hand, but I could move fingers. So I guess I moved a couple of fingers. And they gave her the green light that, you know what, there's more going on than what everybody else believes. Next morning, doctors were making rounds, and through one thing and another, she convinced them not to do the test because she'd gone in. Actually, let me back up. That morning, early morning, my dad couldn't sleep at the hotel, so came to the hospital just to wait. He couldn't go into my room till X time in the morning. But Katie approached my dad. Steve, would you like some good news? After 4 weeks of bad news, I figure any news is good news. And he goes, yeah, sure. She goes, come here. She walked him into my room. She goes, you can't touch him. Okay? Messes with the buttons, brings me down off my meds. She goes, go ahead and talk to him. And I got this is Dad. Mom and Stephanie are here. Maya's doing okay because my fiance was 6 months pregnant with my daughter. Maya's doing okay. Stephanie and Mom are here. We love you. You got to get better. And I was my eyes were fluttering, I guess, because obviously, my dad wasn't really sure. He's like, what's going on? She's like, he's trying to open his eyes. I had just enough drugs still in me that it just wasn't going to happen. And so my dad's like, okay. And she put me back under. She went to the doctor. She protested the doctors and said, there's more going on. Stuff was happening last night, so I backed him down off his meds, and I checked him. And he responded to me on his left and his right side. Doctors go, listen, we just did a test X amount of days ago. It wasn't even a week. It was like 3-4 days, maybe. And he is kaput. Like, there is no room left for that. And she convinced them to redo the test. And understand, I'm a church kid, so I had people praying. And when I say I had people praying, not just a few. I had people from Maine all the way across to Russia praying that I was going to live through this. And so, long story short, they did the test. And I went from 2 frontal lobes that had basically popped and exploded. And we're shearing. I don't need it. And we're shearing, and all the 27 spots on my brain, the 2 frontal lobes of my brain, they looked at it and they couldn't explain it. They said, wow, the front part of his brain is healing. Like, you can barely tell there's anything wrong. And then they went from 27 spots on my brain to less than 15. And being doctors and not being faith-based, their first explanation was, wow, there must have been something wrong with the scan. The first scan was wrong. Let them believe what they want to. But you and I know exactly what happened. Today you do a brain scan on me. I had one done last year, and you can only see 2 spots. And they're not even bleeding, but you can just tell where there were 2 spots that were damaged. The whole front of my head looks perfectly normal. Don't say God doesn't do miracles, So I got out of Boston. I woke up, I couldn't move my legs, which for a kid that was 20, well, I was 21. I got in my accident when I was 20. It was November 3rd. My birthday's on November 29th. So on my 21st birthday, I was in a coma. So when I came to, and it was like December 14th, 15th, something like that. It was unfathomable that my parents were like, do you know how old you are? I was like, yeah, I'm 20. No, you're 21. Blew my mind for a second because I thought I was actually in a coma for a whole year, because I was like, I've been out a year? But literally it was just 5 weeks. And then they went, once I got better and, they took out the trach, they took out feeding tubes, and I was pretty much on my own. I had to have my burns wrapped every day. And understand I spent a lot of time in my room awake alone because my parents were at the hotel sleeping, as people do. But my meds really kind of messed with my sleep patterns, and I'd been on methadone for 5 weeks straight. Literally hung bags of methadone, keeping them in me. So ultimately, when I came out of my coma, I was hooked, if you will. So they had to detox me. And literally cold turkey. I went from having IV intravenous methadone all the time, bags a day, to having none. It gave me hallucinations. I was jonesing the whole cold sweats, and I had hot sweats, cold sweats, and I was literally a mess. And I sat there at night, and once I had this hallucination, I can't even remember what it was. I remember some of the funny ones I remember greatly because, people feel so bad for me. But it's like, oh, it's okay. I've had some pretty rare experiences. But this one scared me. And when I realized it was all not real, I said, God, you got to do something. I was like, because this isn't going to work. I can't do this. I don't want to do this. And so I went to Bangor, and I spent months in between to Boston, Bangor, Ross Manor, back to Boston, back to Bangor, back to a rehab facility. I was in and out of rehab facilities for a few months. Then I went home. And it was tough. I was a 20-year-old kid. I coached soccer. I played church softball. I also, in the back of my mind, I had a little girl that was getting ready to come into this world, that there was a lot of things that I wasn't going to be able to do. Because I literally had the best dad in the world that did everything.